Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at onpurposely.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan Sutherland, and this podcast is dedicated to helping families love God and use tech. Today, we are going to talk about a book that just came out that I am super excited about. It is called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. If you have not read it, please read it. If you don't know where to find it, look on Amazon or wherever you can, or reach out to me. I would love to put you in contact with someone who can get you this book, because what I love about this book is that this book changes the conversation on technology. It stops anyone who may have had the inclination prior to this book being released from just saying nuh-uh to whatever you bring up. Like, you might say, hey, social media can harm children's minds. And they go, nuh-uh. You're like, well, I don't. Okay. I guess I read a book, but maybe not. Or I saw a documentary, or I talked with a friend, or I have kids, or I teach. We've all come at this with our own research, with our own evidence, with our own experience. But at the end of the day, big tech companies just kind of went, nah. And they go to Senate hearings and they're like, yeah, no. And unfortunately, many of our legislators and senators were not prepared to ask proper questions. Enter Jonathan Haidt. He's a New York University psychology professor. He has written a book called The Anxious Generation that we're going to be talking about today. And it is a very gracious, very loving, and deliberate entrance to the tech conversation that really does two things. One, it tracks how America has been parenting and how some of that is negative. It's more fear-based than hope-based. And he does a very nice job of kind of talking that out. And then two, it looks at smartphones, but specifically at social media, which is delivered through smartphones, and the pivot that makes in a child's life and how that has impacted mental health in the United States. He's not operating alone. He has a number of people, but and this is a good time for me to note this. I have called her repeatedly over the last 2 years, Jean Twenge, last name Twenge. If you've ever heard me say that, and I've said it a lot because I reference her work a lot. She's from San Diego State University. The last name is said Twenge, and I apologize if you guys have gone out and said it wrong. The last name is said Twenge, and another thing I learned from this book. So, but the anxious generation is not fear-based. It is not telling you that if you've ever given your kid a phone, you've messed them up. It is not blaming parents for living in a tech world, and it's not excusing parents for making tech choices that may have been suboptimal. Instead, this book focuses really on explaining what has happened, why social media and for young boys, video games is different than real life experiences, and then jumps into so what do we do? And it gives wonderful steps for what your school can do. It does wonderful steps for what your local government and your federal government can do, and wonderful steps for what you as a parent and a loving adult with children, what you can do to help your young people be whole. It is not about penalizing kids for liking tech. It is actually, I saw it as a breath of fresh air. I've given this book to a lot of people so far, and they're like, I found it kind of depressing. I'm like, oh, I can see that if you were operating under a different mindset of like, oh, this is all going to end up better because eventually we'll just realize it was all a bad dream. And instead we realize, no, this is a walking nightmare, and we need to do something about it. And to me, that's super encouraging because, I think, and this will be the last aside beforehand, but I told Anna, I was like, it's like, imagine if I was going to give a entrepreneurship conference, like how to start, your own business. And I was going to present in one room, and then someone else is going to be down the hall, presenting the exact same 50 slides. Like it was just a universal deck of here's 50 images to present in your 60-minute talk. But now imagine that in that same building, I was presenter one, but down the hall, presenter two was someone like Bill Gates. Now, we both have the same slides, but you're going to show up for the second presentation. And that is this conversation. Yes, I've been doing this work for 7 years. And yes, I've read this book sounds like the Who's. When you read Gospel Tech, the book, when it comes out at the end of quarter two, you will hear a lot of lines that are from this, but the book's been in typesetting for 3 months. That's not true. It's been in publishing for 3 months. We finished it in December. But the same references, and actually eerily similar explanation of entertainment technology and how it's behaviorally looping. Like, I promise I didn't steal it, but this is the best of. Like, every book he references, every research piece, it will equip you. It'll change the conversation. Again, from how schools handle it in the classroom to how parents handle it at sleepovers to how corporations handle it when they develop a new product that's releasing to kids. The whole "it doesn't exist" thing, let's just keep going and kids are resilient and they'll get over it, is now officially put to bed. So that's why I'm so excited to talk about it. If you couldn't tell, but I think to start the conversation, we're going to break it up into a couple bits. I originally had 4, and I think we're going to do it in 2. Today, we're going to start off with why this conversation, and I'm going to start that with Jonathan Haidt's delineation between real world and virtual world, and I'll just kind of read what he says there, and it's great. And then I will kind of just give you the best of, if you will, since you don't maybe have the time to read it or listen to it right now, while you go to access that on your own and ingest it and apply it, write in all the margins, bring a pen, bring a highlighter, bring some sticky notes. If you are watching on the YouTubes, like this is my copy, and the sticky notes are just the parts that I want to be able to find fast. So like that's it. And there's some supporters that I've given books to, and I'm excited about it, and I'm literally putting sticky notes in those copies too, because I understand that 300 pages can feel overwhelming and daunting. It isn't meant to know the whole thing by memory. It's meant to get the conversation rolling. It's meant to be a codex of information you can go back to and be like, yeah, what was that thing about teens and mental health and sleep and social media? Like, there's a chapter on that, and you can find it, but it's written, if you're familiar with Malcolm Gladwell, it's written like that, very story-based, very accessible. All right, well, I need to actually get you into something that will help you, which brings us to the 2 kinds of technology. So in this, he says specifically there are 2 kinds of technology, or excuse me, there are 2 kinds of living. And the main crux of the first half of the book is looking at children as they went from a play-based childhood to a screen-based childhood. He puts it at the release of the smartphone as kind of the beginning of this. He'll talk about millennials, but mainly in our conversation about Gen Zers, these kids who are, some of them are in their 20s, but the younger ones are still teenagers. And they are the kids who were raised with tablets and with iPhones, and they don't know the world without constant streaming internet directly to personal devices, which in my own life, like, I remember TVs with knobs. I remember waking up too early and turning on the TV and just getting a colored bar. And if you were unlucky, the TV was really loud when it was left on, and it just screamed at you because sometimes a horrific noise went with the bars to tell you there's literally nothing on TV. Not like Netflix, when there's only 10,000 hours of new content uploaded every single day, and we still convince ourselves that there's quote unquote nothing to watch. Like, I remember those days. Gen Zers do not. This is normal to have a smartphone. It's normal to have fast internet, streaming to personal devices that you can ingest on your own time and pace. With that in mind, here's the terms. Real world. He says he's referring to characteristics of interaction, 4 parts. First, these real world interactions are embodied, and this is a direct quote, meaning we use our bodies to communicate, we are conscious of the bodies of others, and we respond to the bodies of others both consciously and unconsciously. So I love that. It's embodied as the first piece. There's a body interacting with another body. That's the first note of a real world interaction. The second is they're synchronous. They happen at the same time. So now you're going to get body cues, because I speak and you listen, and then you listen and I speak, and I can tell if you're getting bored or if you're feeling frustrated or if you're distracted, whatever it might be, I can now tell. Third is that it's 1-to-1 or 1-to-several, but always one communicator at a time. Meaning if we're in a group and there's 6 of us, 1 will speak and 5 will listen at a dinner table or at a party or walking down the street, or we split off into groups of 2 or 3, and we each have a speaker and we each are listening while we're walking to a location or whatever. But that's a typical 1-to-1 or 1-to-several real world interaction. It is very unusual to have 6 people all talking simultaneously and no one listening. And if that happens, it's typically a really unhealthy communication situation where people are just yelling over the top of each other. Maybe the last family Thanksgiving for you. I don't know. They take place, the fourth for the real world situation, is they take place within communities that have a high bar for entry and exit. This idea that you want to remain a part of this group. And if you get kicked out because you're misbehaving, there's a cost to that. Compare that to virtual world where it's disembodied. asynchronous, one-to-many, and a low bar. So the first one is, let me make sure I get this right. Yeah, disembodied is the first one. So disembodied, what he's looking at there is this idea that you don't know me. Typically, you might even just see an avatar. So yes, there are certain communicative resources, like for us, FaceTime, okay, or Zoom. You're seeing someone and it's synchronous, but it's not embodied. You don't get to physically see that individual and all their tics. Sometimes there's even a filter over it, so you're not even seeing really what that person is doing. It covers creases when maybe they look anxious because it's trying to make them look smooth and presentable. So you do lose some of that in the disembodied format. But then you also lose some of the synchronicity. I don't know how to say the word in that way. So it becomes asynchronous. It's not happening at the same time. So I record it and I send it to you. Is it convenient? Absolutely. But it is still a virtual communication. And that's important. It's part of the virtual world. And that's one of the standards for it. The third is that it's one-to-many. So we can have lots of people talking simultaneously because it's asynchronous. So I could watch your video and then I could go watch another video and then I could watch a third video that happened 10 minutes ago, 10 days ago, 10 years ago. And it doesn't matter for the delivery of the content when I happen to be watching it. But that's a very virtual experience and interaction. And then the last one is the low bar. Basically what they're trying to get at here is the idea that when a relationship or an interaction becomes low cost, it becomes disposable. So the one that's kind of set hard on my heart, I'll do two. One is when young people go to social platforms to have friends. They can make friends so easily because, we're all playing the same game and we're all part of the same squad. And this is so exciting because I get to be part of something bigger than myself. And it is. It's very cool in that way. But when something goes wrong in life, those people weren't there to be your friend. They were there to fill a squad. And so you go, oh, hey, can we go do this one thing? Or, you know what, I'm not feeling great today. Like maybe we can go on a walk. Or, you know what, my mom's sick. And those kids go, oh, that's fine. Like just come back when you're better. And that's not friendship. Like if someone's not willing to experience sacrifice in order to gain you in relationship, then that's not friendship. That just is convenience. And similarly with churches, we saw a lot of churches go online and it can be a wonderful resource, but there is this concern that when it becomes convenient, I didn't like the way that particular sermon went, or I didn't like the way that worship song went. I no longer go to this church, new tab, I go to this church now. And one tab over, you're a completely different experience, potentially from a different part of the world, because it's convenient now. And you're no longer known. You're no longer held accountable. You no longer are following any biblical context for church membership. Like the purpose of the church is not to get bottoms and seats and to get viewership higher. The purpose of the church is to be known and to repent and to live out the way, the gospel, and to do that in a relational way that demands humility from us, that simply is not supported by the internet medium. I'll say that. It's not against it. You can do it well, especially in using things like Zoom, but it's the one-to-many. You're an unknown face. You're just another viewer in the total for the day. If that's your only format for engaging in the church body, I want to challenge you to find another way to get involved, find a way to get discipled and to be known. So that's real world versus virtual world. Real world, embodied, synchronous, one-to-one or several, and a high bar for entry. Virtual worlds are disembodied, asynchronous, one-to-many, and a low bar for entry. They become disposable. So with that in mind, we now need to look at, all right, but what has been happening? The book is titled The Anxious Generation. What's happening? And I think if we were to focus just on today's episode, we're going to talk about the fact that tech can be as bad as we thought, and it's twofold. First, it's social media is just as bad as we were worried it was for girls. And second, it's video games tend to be the main downfall for boys. The social media doesn't seem to be having the same impact. So a little context on why. Why is social media just as bad as we feared? If your daughter is using social media right now and she's under the age of 16, she is experiencing some level of this. Very likely. The main reasons, if I were to break it down into a couple, the first main issue is that it's taking a real life opportunity cost. So your daughter, if she is under the age of 15, is somewhere heading into puberty or processing it. That stage specifically, Haidt points out, is an incredibly important age for mental development. That your daughter needs real world experiences, needs real world friendships, needs real world stress. Yes, needs real world stress. We'll come to that next episode when we talk about being anti-fragile, but the idea is stress is a critical part of your child growing and learning. The downside is this internet does not deliver real world stress. It delivers virtual stress, which is much, much worse. And it does not develop the sort of resilience that we would want to see in a young person who's becoming healthful. So that's the first piece, is opportunity cost. You're not getting the opportunities you would have gotten. And he does a great job of running through some of these charts, but the number one I want to focus on is the idea that more than 90% of teens say they spend almost every day accessing online social media platforms, and over half of those young people say they are on it nearly all the time. Meaning you're not staring at your phone all the time, but you're getting notifications. Your thoughts are getting disrupted. Your relationships are being interrupted because you're checking that tap that you just got, either a physical buzz or a ding, or just the constant wondering of, I wonder if it's now. Oh no, but I'll pull the refresh. What about now? Oh, still nothing. Well, I'll post something and then maybe people will get back to me. Now I'll send 5 more DMs because I just need to know that I matter in the ether of the internet, right out there in space. So the lost opportunity cost of being involved in something else is big, but also the design. Social media is designed to take your attention, to make money, and it's doing that to minors. It's legal because of COPPA. The 1997 internet rules that were put in place say that 13 is old enough to sign a contract with a social media company and to give them rights to your data and for them to let you use their product in return. So you can use Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok without a monthly subscription because they are selling your data to advertisers. But in order to do that effectively, they need to keep you on it for longer than you probably would intend to use it. This pivot, as the book points out, started in 2012. 2012 is really when social media became less about connecting with people. Like, oh, Aunt Sally is on here. Let's connect with Aunt Sally and see how the cats are doing. Oh, my friend Tina is on here, or whatever age group name you want to use. I don't know if anyone still names their children Tina, but the idea is it used to be about actually connecting with one another. 2012 is when the pivot fully happened, away from the like button had been invented by this point. It had moved to a followers focused platform, Facebook, and then Instagram, which Meta eventually purchased. And in that year, by the way, Instagram went from something like 10 million followers to 80 million followers in a 12-month period. And it was very focused on body image, very focused on I was going to say quality of life, but that's not actually what I meant. Lifestyle. It was based on these shiny people doing shiny things, and it's meant to deliver that really quickly. And that's where you get people mimicking what gets likes. I can see that that's a popular post. I can see that that person has a lot of followers. I can see the type of post, the way they dress, the way they act, and now I begin to act accordingly. This is where we see, as Haidt points out, this is where we see mimicry, even in things that used to be considered mental disorders. So you have documented examples of things like multiple personality, where young people are showing up, but they're not showing up with various symptoms. They're showing up with identical symptoms, as one psychiatrist from the UK points out. Like, all of these young people are showing up. They all say they have this disorder. They don't. Like, they're all displaying the exact same tics, personality distortions that the other one just had, and that's not the way this disorder works. Like, you should have actual fragmented disorders. You should have variance and uniqueness to the way it impacts you versus somebody else, but they're all showing up with the exact same thing. Turns out there was an important influencer who was talking a lot about this, and young people were picking it up from two parts. One, emotional contagion is the first they pick up. So when young people see something, it just catches on. He uses the example in the book of some NASA astronauts who went to space with someone who was basically hard to get along with. And that caught on, like bad attitudes he doesn't use that in this book. I just mixed it with Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman's book on psychology. But emotional contagion is a real thing. There was another flight that was grounded because the entire team believed they smelled fumes. There were no fumes. That wasn't a thing, but it was an emotional contagion. It's been documented through the Middle Ages of young people in the Middle Ages. Frantic dancing was catching on, and this has been documented in different parts of Europe through the Middle Ages, to the point where people were dying of exhaustion because they were dancing so hard. But it's a contagion. It's not a disease that anyone caught from the water. It's not something that someone came in and like put a hex on the town. But there are these things that you can catch because you believe it's real, and it then passes in that way socially. That can happen through social media. But then there's also the prestige bias, this piece where that person gets lots of likes and they're important, and therefore I want to mimic them, to the point where we can subconsciously even mimic a disorder, something that's unhealthful, and we can do it not trying to get attention this way. It wasn't like a written down plan, but because we're mimicking this individual, we even pick up the things that would be considered unhealthful practices. Like, we wouldn't teach someone to do this, but it happens. That's social media for young girls. We are finding that it makes them more isolated. We are finding that it makes them more anxious. We are finding that it makes them less mentally well. I'll actually quote this from page 148. This is Haidt speaking. Taken as a whole, the dozens of experiments that Jean Twenge, Zach Roush, and I have collected confirm and extend the patterns found in the correlational studies. Social media use is a cause of anxiety, depression, and other ailments, not just to correlate. Meaning, it's not just that kids were getting less healthy and social media happened to be here. He looks at the economic trends. He looks at the political trends. He looks at the global view. This hit New Zealand and Australia and America and Europe all in 2012. And it's gotten worse in the last 12 years. It is a direct causal link. You take kids that didn't have problems, you hand them a smartphone with social media on it, and that child will do worse. Now, that's terrible news. Like, we need to recognize that. And there's a lot of hope in it because we know the problem. We know what we were looking for in a lot of different areas, like, oh, why this increase in bullying? Why this increase in self-harm? Why this increase in anxiety and depression? Social media is a major part of it. The second part that Haidt very graciously points out is that we also are helicopter parents. Partly because society demands that we be so, partly because it allows us to be so. So let's start with the second one. Allows us. We have devices now that we can follow our children around all the time. We can read all their texts. We can read all of their messages from all of their friends. We can know exactly what's happening in every one of their classes. Sometimes we get daily reports on their grades, on their behavior, on whatever it might be. And Haidt's encouragement to us is that we need to take a step back, that our children need space from us, that they need to, yes, prove that they're trustworthy. And then once they've proven faithful in little things like do your chores at home, go to bed on time, put your phone down when we're eating dinner. Okay, great. You're doing those things. So I trust you with the rest of this. And this is a conversation we've had a lot in this podcast, but I want to emphasize this. Yes, it's bad news that mental health is at an all-time, I guess, precarious position for young people. But it was headed there before we knew this information. Now we know, which means if we're having fights about technology, if we're seeing a decline in mental health and we see smartphones and social media related to it, that becomes the premise of our conversation. Use the reset. Point out the part of your child's technology that is life that's most impacted by their technology. Their relationships and responsibilities, their emotions, their sleep, their enjoyment, their time. And then have the loving conversation of, hey, I love you, and I see that when you use this technology, your relationships begin to get more aggressive, or you become more withdrawn, or you worry about your body a lot, or you start talking about how other people are being mean, whatever it might be, that can become your conversational win with your child. So please go in there, especially with young girls. The second piece of that is, if you have already given social media to your child, you just want to make sure that it is going well. If it's not, it is perfectly reasonable to remove the social media or to simply replace it with a safer device, something like a Gab phone, which is a dumb phone that allows text and phone calls, take pictures, but not send them. no app store, no internet. So all of the distraction, the constant tapping, the fragmented attention, those pieces go away, and a lot of the anxiety with it. And you can also look at kind of the lower grade smartphone, something like a Bark, where it defaults to safety, it defaults to parental control, and then you can give as much line as your child has earned for the opportunity to participate in those spaces. Just know there is now no research suggesting that social media is a good decision for children under 16 at all. It's not, it's a net loss. Can your child engage in those through a browser, through your home computer? Certainly, there's an option for there, but we're talking opening an account in your child's name to post their own content onto social media so they can gain likes, followers, share direct messages, and all of that. It does not need to happen under 16. And if it's happening, we must make sure the conversation has already occurred about tech health, about reset, about some of the tracks and the foibles of the social media platforms, that they're no longer directed to connect people, they're directed to compete people. Okay? They want you to feel better or worse than everyone else you see. They are not okay with you just being friends, because that doesn't drive eyes or anxiety or views. So we want to make sure that we are being deliberate with that. So parents, please start that conversation. Ask your child how their friends handle social media, what they see as potential pitfalls, and how they feel about it. And if your child's under 16, think about maybe taking a month away. A month is how long it takes the brain to reset and recalibrate dopamine to be able to feel happy about real life, and the amount of real life relationship feedback that a single person or a group of people can give you. It's not as much as social media can give you. So that's kind of the framework on the girls' side of this conversation. Social media is the number one way. It's a causal link with the decline in mental health. Boys are still impacted by social media, but not as much. And that has to do with, to get into the psychology of it, he says, all right, but Haidt is the he, says boys are looking more basically for proving themselves in action, and girls are looking for more social validation, if you were to summarize it. And that social validation in social media can become a toxic place, because you can actually be mean just by not validating something. So you post something and it didn't get enough likes. Now that can be mean. That's a lot of weight to put on a brain that's developing, and that's the final piece. Is a brain, especially for girls 11 to 13, is when typically a girl is hitting puberty, and that is when the brain is most vulnerable to those kind of social pressures. Let your child get through it. Let him get through 15. Let her become 16, and then only give a phone if she's earned it by being trustworthy in little things, and if she's asked for it. And we are not seeing a flood of children being raised contentedly without a smartphone, who are then becoming adults and are now floundering in adulthood. We're seeing the reverse. We're seeing young people that are given social devices, don't know how to handle real life social situations, and are just trying to figure out how to launch emotionally, relationally, and professionally because there's been so much trauma experience. So please take the loving steps to begin the conversation, set up some healthy hedges, and remove it if it's not healthy in this season. You're not being mean, you're being very, very loving. It's a kind of digital surgery, if you will, which brings us to the boys' side. So on the boys' side, and I'll be brief on this. I want to note that they are different. The girls, it is primarily social media, as I mentioned. Boys still use social media. They still have negative effects, but it's not as great. When we look at boys, and when we look specifically at boys and their devices, there's two things that pop out as negative. And I should have mentioned this earlier, but I'll bring it up now. Haidt is not a Christian. In fact, Haidt is an atheist, and he brings that up a lot. Throughout reading this book, if you read evolution, just read design. Because he talks about evolution that does things that evolution actually can't explain for how it happened, like little itty bitty nuances in how humanity is motivated, like the concept. He'll call it design if it shows up in a product, but he calls it evolution if it shows up in a human. So just another conversation for another day. But the two things he points out that are the most negative for young boys is pornography and video games. Probably shocking nobody. Like if you were just to ask, hey, what do boys struggle with most in digital spaces or in the virtual world? Pornography and video games. If I were to sum that up, the summary is basically both of them give you the feeling of success with zero risk. You don't have to grow. You don't have to experience pain because you can get whatever you want on your terms and your time. That's incredibly unhealthy for young men for two reasons. One, on the pornography side, you get the illusion of intimacy, and then they aren't taking risks in real life. They're not getting to know people. They're not dating. They're not forming the personal character that would even be attractive to someone because they can get this digital person that takes no effort and no risk. On a scriptural level, horrific. That's not what you were designed for. On a cultural level, terrifying. I don't want my daughter dating someone who has those kinds of standards and who he is going to invest in. And on a societal level, when we're looking at half the population of young men, it's scary. It's quite scary that has now become commonplace. So commonplace that in 2017, meta-analysis of over 50 studies collectively including more than 50,000 participants from 10 countries. Pornography consumption was associated with lower interpersonal satisfaction outcomes in cross-sectional surveys, longitudinal surveys, and experiments, and specifically mostly in men. Meaning, at no point in those 50,000 individuals was porn a net gain. Okay, that's the idea. And he goes on to say it's likely to get worse with the metaverse, spatial video, and generative AI. He doesn't take as hot of a take on this, but I'll just read this. Immersing boys in an infinite playlist of hardcore porn videos during the sensitive period in which their sexual centers of their brains are being rewired. So this is the kind of 13 to 15 for boys, but 11 to 15, if you will, is maybe not so good. I appreciate that. Maybe not so good. So a double qualifier there, not a strong statement, but if you read the rest of the chapter, pretty strong statement. That pornography is a real world danger. It's on the internet, and a young man who's just perusing the wilds of the digital world with no support or care, no hedges built in place, and no conversation is going to run into trouble, and it's going to cause real world harm to himself now, to society later, and to whatever future relationships he may want to go into. But that brings us to video games. Video games, very similar to the illusion of intimacy, video games give us the illusion of adventure. It gives us the opportunity to experience victory with no risk. And risk, as we'll talk about next time, is really important. Your child needs to know something is on the line here and you could get hurt. Now go do it. Use a hammer, use a saw, ride your bike, go for a run, jump off that block, climb that tree, do it. Yeah, you might get hurt. Our job is not to have the safest children possible. Again, I said this book is not written from a point of fear. It's not going, ooh, tech is scary, stay away from it. It's going, no, tech is not all the same. There's kinds of tech, and he focuses specifically, social media for girls is toxic. If they're under the age of 16, keep them off it. Don't give them a smartphone at the age of 13. Give them a dumb phone. Don't give them social media up front. Let them use it through a browser and prove that they can be healthy. Don't creep on every one of their messages. Use something like Bark to get alerts when something goes awry, right? There needs to be an adult in the room. There needs to be a dog to warn when danger appears. Whatever it is, Bark is a great opportunity because it doesn't tell you everything they do. It allows them the trust they've earned. And if someone says something, or if your child says something that's concerning, you get an alert and the relational win. Yay. In this case, similar point. Video games are not completely problematic, but he breaks it down into 4 categories, and he actually quotes the 7-item gaming addiction scale for adolescents that researchers use, and he puts them into 4 categories: addicted, problematic, engaged, and casual gamers. Casual gamers, you can go and pick up a game, play it with friends, walk away and never think about it again. Engaged gamers, you really do. You might forget what's happening around you when you're playing, but it's just for that time. Time ends, you walk away, and you can be healthful. You have other interests, relationships, and you're not missing out on real life. The problematic is when they're able to manage the negative behaviors. I would put myself in this category. I was what I would call compulsive. It was on my brain all the time. I only gamed a few hours a week. I gamed like 10 as an adult even, which that might sound like a ton to you, but it's not that much. It's a couple hours on a Friday, a Saturday, and then maybe 30 minutes to an hour on odd days throughout the week. So very reasonable in my estimation for what I was doing, but it was problematic. It was causing me to give up other opportunities, relationships, responsibilities, sleep. And then you have addicted, where you are giving up things you need to get to what you want. And the thing you want in this case would be video games, and it's deeply problematic. In the rest of this chapter, he goes on to cite that if you took all the research on problematic gaming, it's something like 7% of gamers are dealing with it, specifically teen gamers in this case. So if you took 7% of teen boys, so 70 million teens in the United States, something like 90% of them game. So if we're going into the somewhere around 25 to 30 million, and then you were to take 7% of that, so you have 1.5 million teen boys in the United States that are addicted gamers, not just problematic, not just engaged, not casual. Like, these are the ones that are actively, the wheels are falling off. They're not getting real world experience. They're not building real world relationships. They're dealing with high levels of toxic anxiety because gaming is constantly drawing them in. That is deeply concerning. And what we see here is the answer is get them into real world adventures, get them into real world relationships, get them into opportunities where they can engage in healthful, risky behaviors that are going to cause them to grow and force them to recognize what they are capable of and what they're not capable of and try new things. Yes, the digital space can be great. There's still 3 other categories that are fine, right? You can even be an engaged gamer and be all right. Problematic? We start moving the other way and replacing some of those gaming behaviors with other behaviors until we find a balance. My balance? Flick the switch off, rip the cord out of the wall, walk away. That's what it took for me. I can't game at all. And it's been, 2011. So coming up on 13 years in May of this year. And I haven't played a video game because it's just too much for me. That's the conversation you need to have with your child. Where is your limit? Where are your goals? What are you called to do, have, and be in light of being a new creation in Christ? You are a new creation. You're not earning God's love by not gaming or losing his love by gaming and being unhealthy. You're losing joy. You're losing opportunity. You're losing chances to experience what really will make you alive. And that's what we want for you. So in this book, Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation, he addresses the difference in real world and virtual world behaviors. The fact that social media is exactly as bad as we feared for young people, specifically for young girls, that it's designed that way, and that if your child is under 16, she should not have social media accounts of her own. But at 16, you can start to have that conversation about how much trust has been earned, how can you prove faithful in that, and then how do you keep some accountability, some hedges in place, so when things go awry, and that for boys, so that when things go awry, you're the first responder to help your child process that. And for boys, with video games and pornography, those are things in digital spaces that are constantly calling to them and that are having massive impacts on young men's ability to form meaningful relationships, develop emotional health, and participate in the hard challenges of real life that take some strength building, some heavy lifting in real life to get ready for just operating as an adult. And we need to let them have those chances. Yep, they're going to get scraped and bruised and hurt. We can pick challenges for them and help them pick challenges for themselves that are risky, but still reasonable. And we'll talk more about that next week. Again, anti-fragility is a big part of that, which comes from a different book that Haidt worked on, but that's it. So I hope that this was encouraging to you. I know it was heavy there and that there's, I don't know. I don't want to pull punches. I don't want to tell you that it'll be fine when it's very clearly not. We now have the research and the wise voices and the massive megaphone coming from someone who's put his career behind making these statements. He is getting pushback, but he is winning a lot of ears. A lot of years of administrators and product designers and legislators and parents and loving individuals who see young people and go, you know what, I want better for you. I don't just want less tech, I want more life. And that's really what we're talking about here. So I hope it's encouraging. If you have any questions, reach out to me, nathan@gospeltech.net. I would love to hear what you have to say, what strikes you as interesting or applicable. If this is applicable, would you share it with someone? Would you share this episode with somebody and let them know that it helped you? Would you share this book with somebody and let them know that it's out there either to listen to, you can listen to the audio version, or to read? And then would you join us next week as we continue this conversation about how we can love God and use tech?